Dry Wedge, December 27th, 1914. Winter on one hand, and defensive strategy along the endless line on the other, have condemned us to an almost intolerable state of uselessness. We wait in the antechamber of His Majesty the War, who deigns to make us wait. So we wait till he calls. But it is not as if he said, "I shall not need you until the water before you has run away." He makes us sit, fully dressed, in the anteroom, thinking of how we will carry out his orders, holding out stiffly so long as the remains of nerves will let us. Such is the winter campaign standing in readiness like a picket, and this lying fallow of capable brains is worse than the lazy, undisciplined loafing of great masses of troops, of army reserves, of cavalry condemned to inactivity, of transport and supply columns. They all get slack. Of course, they get a little rusty, sometimes more than they should, yet inactivity means to them not a loss of life, but boredom, ease and loafing. However, those others in their midst do not dare to ease off and feel a sort of poison creeping into their systems. It oozes in. The General Staff Office are not resting, but feel themselves unfulfilled. Immobility leads to nervousness, to a feeling of weakness that does not really exist. They lose confidence they know too much about the shortcomings of their own troops. They pay too much attention to insignificant things that surround them. Public opinion, decorations, visits of kings and princes. As if that sort of thing mattered hereabouts. As far as the mixing up of public opinion with the war is concerned, there is hardly any difference in style and tone between our communiques. For the Western Front at least, and those of the French, which take public opinion most unduly into consideration. They have not the courage to keep silent over a period of days as they had at the beginning of the war. They feel that they must be reassuring, and effect the very reverse through the smallness of the news. We give a faithful account of every bit of trench and every handful of prisoners we have taken, and pass over in silence every bit of trench and handful of prisoners we have lost, just like our adversary, as if it all mattered in the very least, as if there were any place for such stuff in a war communique. These details have their place in the war diaries of companies, or at the most of battalions, but not in the daily reports of an army. It seems that we cannot get rid of our old-time mimicry of the foreigner, so much so that the style of our communiques gradually approaches that of the French, in fact becomes identical. We made a little progress. We gained some ground. All the vague clichés that we used to smile at contemptuously are now to be found in our own reports, and these have no idea that they have been copied from the French. The public was being very well educated at the beginning of the war. Now it is being spoilt. The authorities had even managed to wean it from its taste for snappy paragraphs of news, and to focus its attention on the stark greatness and simplicity of events. Now, the war communique is edited like a voluminous local paper. The only thing that is lacking is a column of communicated items, which would really be the proper term for the little snippets of news out of company war diaries, telling of their successes and minor deeds of heroism. Orders and decorations have something fine about them when they are granted for real merit, but these distinctions lose their value when they are dished out like the insignia of a club. The feeling that a man can only gain distinction by himself has got lost. These people are happy when they are selected for distinction, and the less they have done to deserve it, the happier they are. The greed of certain elements for orders and decorations is enough to make one sick. The tradition of a manly breast smothered in medal ribbons goes hand in hand with that of the Christian soldier, which is really the only one that matters. At the same time, the Christian ruler is not at all displeased if the dog of a Turk furnishes him with some fairly useful comrades in arms. And new decorations are cropping up all the time. All the smallest princelings are creating fresh pots for their loving subjects to hunt. I have not yet managed to appreciate what difference there is between Prussian valour and Oldenburg valour, or how the latter may be distinguished from the Hessian or Anhalt brand. To those who know, the only real war decoration will be the Iron Cross, first class, and only if worn by a captain, subaltern, NCO, or private. Now, when battalion and company, group and battery commanders learn how plentifully the Iron Cross has been sown in supply columns, offices and headquarters, they find themselves in the painful necessity of having to hunt Iron Crosses for their own troops, who have seen real fighting and therefore rightly or wrongly attach more value to the distinction. It will soon come to be a competition as to who can get the highest average of iron crosses. In fact, it has come to that already. On this point, the war has not made the German any greater. He remains a snapper-up of outward honours. I would venture to dub his quest for honour souveniring. It is a bitter pill to swallow for those who have really won their cross for heroic conduct under fire. New Year's Eve, 1914. The year is drawing to its close. It has been a grave year for all of us, who, in spite of all earnestness and deep thought, must admit to ourselves that we cannot realise what the war means. Does it not seem to be a monstrous folly that mankind with drawn sword is weltering in a massacre, before which it will some day stand aghast, like Ajax among the slaughtered sheep? We must not give way to such thoughts. They are concerned solely with outward and visible symptoms without grasping their inner meaning. Perhaps the immeasurable result of all these atrocities, this destruction, this soul-killing brutality, will be to bear a new ethos and a new pathos for the world, as the new clean flesh strives upward towards the light from the depths of a suppurating wound. What if— I will try to render the two words I have just used more or less in German. What if a new valuation of the worth of mankind and a new appreciation of the destiny of man should be born in each of us, perhaps in only a few at first, as a gigantic good to compensate us for a monstrous evil? That would be enough. It would recompense us for all that the war has done to us. Without this hope, I feel that it would be unbearable. But I did not intend to speak of such matters today. The days of the changing year demand lighter thoughts, even from us who belong to the seriousness of the front. These days devoted by ancient custom to light-hearted enjoyment and the promise of a fairer prospect at every new year. A sort of New Year's philosophy is permeating my being, rising up like the steam of the punch that we will brew on New Year's Eve, in spite of the imminence of the foe and of death, thanks to you at home. All systems of philosophy can be contested, but not New Year's philosophy. For it is formless as the drift of steam that arises from the punch glass. It brings me into a strange frame of mind. The world seems to become more simple. Philosophy comes easy to the soldier, for most of his surroundings are quite unproblematical. Most problems disappear entirely, others remain. I cannot fathom the reason for it, but it seems that war correspondents and hunters of war sensations are, of all mankind, the most exposed to shell fire and all the dangers of war. At least this is what I gather from the papers. It is incredible, yet one must believe on reading their reports, what an inborn characteristic of their person or species it seems to be, to draw shell fire on themselves wherever they go. The range of the enemy batteries increases by at least 3 kilometers as soon as they appear. I thought at first that they were confusing gunfire with the sound of the guns, and believed themselves to be exposed to fire when they were in fact only exposed to sound. Then I imagined that the thunder of the guns had some painful effect on them, that they were, in a manner of speaking, thunderstruck. Nature affords parallel cases. I remember that the cat draws in her tail as if it had been stepped on during a thunderstorm, and that she half closes her eyes to show that she suffers from tummy ache. So it is possible, thought I, that the thunder of guns hits them in the belly, but I have been forced to abandon this theory. Experience proves, in spite of numerous exceptions, that the above-mentioned category of human beings are more exposed to hostile shellfire than we are, and at longer ranges. And when I come to think of ourselves, I notice many strangely silent folk amongst us. These are the men who have taken part in attacks and have lain under fire for hours and days, not like those who write about it in the newspapers. One meets a little dried-up captain with a kindly nose, rather too large for him, and grey-blue eyes that seize and hold objects like those of a sparhawk. He sits in silence, seems to be cold, and sticks his hands together in his sleeves as in a muff. He is one of those who have been under fire in deadly earnest, and when he is warm at last and throws open his coat, you may see that he wears the Iron Cross, first class, on his breast, beneath his heart. If you are in luck and he happens to be in the mood, you may hear something. How he lay right up forward with his company, nothing to the left, nothing to the right, and nothing behind them. Yet they had orders to hold the trench. Then came the shells. Slowly searching they came, until one got the range, and there was no longer any trench in that spot, only a ragged crater. This was on the outer flank. Then came shell after shell, eating their way nearer and nearer. The men had to lie down. They had their orders that the trench must be held. Yet another ragged crater, not far from the first one. He sent back a message. "Is no support coming up, to the right or the left or behind me?" No support came. The reserves had been used up. But a fresh order came that the line was to be held at all costs. So they lay still. "Can't we retire, Herr Hauptmann?" asked one of them, who had never in his life made such a request before. No. And so they lay there, waiting for the next shell, calculating that their trench was getting shorter and shorter, and that they would soon be without any cover at all. But there they lay until the night came. There was not much left of the trench, but there was a chance to breathe. Then came another day with the searching shells, then another night, and then reliefs. The little captain said nothing about the casualties. I could see that a picture inside his mind was keeping him from speaking. After a while he spoke again. "Heavy shells fly so slowly. One can hear them coming a long way off. We had to keep lying down." That was all he had to say about the fire of heavy artillery. And once again I realized that experience makes one silent, or at least sparing of words. The history of this war will never be written. Those who could write it will remain silent. Those who write it have not experienced it. "That sounds blasphemous," I exclaimed to myself, as the spirit of New Year's philosophy dictated these words to me. Yet my nasty imagination told me that they must be true. January 2nd, 1915. Not one of the belligerent powers, and not one of their men, have as yet developed a technique of modern warfare, unless it is Hindenburg. To impress one's particular stamp on a war, Napoleonic, Hannibalic, Moltke-esque or Caesarian, that would constitute a style. The first grand attack on the Western Front was more of an elemental shock of two gigantic forces in rapid motion, and had nothing of the style of war. A certain duration of the action, a certain repetition, a selected speed, is essential to that. Every blow of Hindenburg's army shows the impress of the same mark. One recognizes him in every one of his thrusts, as one might know a knight, close-visored, by the way he bears his lance. But whose style have we to show in the West? Of course, I do not speak of the Germans alone. Neither have the French nor the English produced a man who imprints his personality on this war. One cannot deny that the hedgehog shows a certain originality in his manner of self-defense, but one cannot discover any particular signs of genius. The French and the English lack even that elementary and convincing quality that we showed at the beginning, in default of a style. At any rate, it was imposing. Our first advance had a style that could be perceived, but it seems probable that it was conceived and planned by one who is now dead, or who is not on the spot to carry on the style. 2. Same date, and now that I look up once more and prompted by your quest for scattered riches, think of peace. I had not thought of it for a long time. I see the new year standing before me. This time we will not change the old for the new, like a servant that we dismiss. No one would be satisfied. It would seem that we all need the new year. Even the war needs it. War in particular seems to lose dignity when it becomes an accepted daily occurrence. Would a constant thunderstorm, an earthquake as a normal condition, a massacre as a common event, impress us as matters gravely affecting our destiny? Apart from a transient feeling of disgust, we would become quite callous. Certainly I admire this war, admire it as an unprecedented event, but I do not want it to shave and brush its teeth before me every day, for then it betrays too many of the characteristics of peace and ordinary life, to which it bears no relation. One forgets that it is holy. One gets into the frame of mind of the sacristan who shuffles about the church in his shabby slippers all day, forgetful of the divine presence enthroned there. I cannot say that the war bores me, but it does not know what to do with itself. When I read the things that are written about it, I somehow feel that there is something lacking in its inward self. And then all becomes clear. It is we men who have made the war, and we are ignorant of it and cannot discern its shape. Dry wedge, January 4th, 1915. Bruges, the dead city, presents a strange spectacle as a German garrison town. At 12 o'clock each day, a naval band plays in the marketplace. German march tunes break upon the sharp pinnacles of the belfry. The great square and the stony streets are full of soldiers who throng the shops, try to turn some cafes into German inns, and do their best to banish peaceful death from the town. But the quiet quay, the béguinage, the little squares and lanes are as dead and quiet as ever. Now and then a German officer appears, showing such a lack of understanding and reverence that I really feel happy to think that there is nothing of this kind in Halle or Bitterfeld, or wherever he may have come from. The Memlings and Michelangelo's Madonna are missing from their places en sécurité, as they say. I took S and Dr. E along with me. Thus I managed to avoid for one day the drivel of the third officer of my small HQ. This was a pleasure in itself, enhanced by the enjoyment of the delicious town. We ate some cheap oysters, drank a bottle of Saint-Marceau, and then contemplated the rare beauties of the town in the right mood. Soothed by the silence of departed years, we wandered about feeling at peace with all the world, by the little antique shop with the two pretty daughters, the fish market with its many fruits of the sea, the narrow passages and sudden vistas, forgetting the war without an effort. The weather was almost fine, a rare occurrence at this time of the year. For the weather here deserves a word all to itself. I had no idea that so much rain could be hung onto one solitary sky. Brussels, January 10th, 1915. My horse and I took a toss the other day and I broke a tooth. So I am here under medical treatment. The town, which I had never visited before, is magnificent in the true sense of the word. The site is ordained by nature to be the fit and appropriate setting for a city. The relation between the upper and the nether city is singularly fitting. As a prospect, more could have been made of St. Gudule. The marketplace is typical of the character of the city, piled up riches, a jumble of self-assertive, different styles, that get along very happily together of all periods, yet preserving their individuality. Very mercantile, savouring of gold and pomp, rather snobbish, and rather too much gold about. I was in St. Gudule this morning. A priestling read out a horribly long document précieux, as he called it, from the bishop. It was anti-German propaganda, political claptrap of the first water, and exceedingly dull. I was the only officer in the church. With its German garrison, German sentries at the royal palace, German officials in the post office, German railway guards, and von der Goltz's bright lads of the Jungdeutschland in the streets, feeling very soldierly with their smart turned-up hats with the brown cockade and saluting vigorously. The town is very strange, an experience in itself. The happy-go-lucky citizens count themselves lucky, in a way, not to know how the war is getting on. Il faut attendre, and they wait. Waiting is tiresome, and one must kill time somehow. So one kills it. This is, roughly speaking, the train of thought of the boulevards. Billets in the hotels are free. Everything else has to be paid for. The prices in the pubs are fairly stiff. As everyone is dependent on them, two categories come into conflict. The economical German captain, who never goes out in the ordinary way, and does not like to spend money. He complains that there is no boots in the hotel, and when he is referred to the night porter instead, finds the latter's help much too expensive. On the other side we have the subaltern, for whom nothing is too dear. A few Bavarian officers' wives are here on a visit to their husbands. A few old colonels stride about with hunched-up shoulders and riding whips, showing that they have spent most of their lives in strained relations with a horse. I shall be going back to the front in a few days. I confess to myself that I am uneasy about it. Same place, same date. Many things are, indeed, puzzling. One can possibly find a reason for calling those uninteresting German biscuits Leibniz Keks, but we have a brand of sardines, enclosed in bluish metal tins, and differing in no wise from the ordinary kind, that bears the name Guillaume Tell. After long reflection, it occurred to me the Tell in question must have been a sardine fisher on the Lake of the Four Cantons. Dry wedge, January 16th, 1915. Nothing in front of us has changed. The artificial inundation made a great fragmentary sea out of the numerous canals, and hinders any important attack on either side. In spite of this, no day passes without its toll of dead. The storms from the west almost drag you off your horse and fling the rain clouds incessantly onto the earth, like bursting hose-pipes, armies of clouds. This is a war of attrition. The side that is used up first will lose it. One begins to sneak away from one's post inwardly, with a certain pleasure in sneaking away. Dryweege, January 21st, 1915. Kitchener is reported to have said, when asked when the war would end, that he did not know. He only knew that it would begin in May. If only they would save up our new corps until the men are well grounded in discipline and the officers in leadership. They are absolutely useless here at present because of circumstances that I have often tried to depict. What the English do they do well? They will make good soldiers. Perhaps not so many as people think, but good ones. If England were to introduce conscription, it would be more dangerous for us than anything she has ever done. For I do not agree with those who ask contemptuously where they will find their officers and NCOs. They will all come. The rowing blues, the leading lights of the cricket and football teams, the athletic trainers, runners, and many more. Are the Berlin police to be compared with the English police, although most of them are Prussian NCOs? The English policemen know how to deal with masses. They handle them perfectly. The quality of troops has always compensated for their comparatively small numbers. They have given us plenty of trouble here too, few though they are, in fact, definitely outnumbered. To January 21st, 1915. Bad news from home, T's accident. That such a misfortune should befall a delicate little creature, like a strong person whose strength could be put to the test. But we have spoilt ourselves by expecting Providence to be reasonable. If we appreciate its senselessness more, we will be better armed against such injustice. Here I sit, where the most simple-minded NCO could probably do all that is expected of me for the next few weeks. But I cannot follow where my thoughts lead me to give a little sympathy, gently to compel someone to get out into the open air. Bad news from home. The letters I get are sorrowful and spiritless. It almost seems as if ordained that you should suffer the loss of a motherly woman at this moment, when it must seem lighter in the presence of bitter disaster far and near. A monstrous cloud lies upon us all. Who thinks of the hailstone that strikes down a tired flower? One thing is certain, these times can only be endured by a soldier, and they must be endured. If one looked round for the thing we call happiness, that was once and will be again, this war would be unendurable. I must give myself up willingly to the war, the lord of the hour. Anything else were a betrayal at the supreme moment. No, let us inhale its fiery breath. Then each of us will bury his dead more easily, weep over them more simply, and mourn them more beautifully, as all his actions must be easier, simpler, and more beautiful. Peace will come overnight. There is no other gospel today. We are, both of us, in the war, although many miles lie between us. January 28th, 1915. Yesterday we celebrated the Kaiser's birthday as well as we could. It was a clear, bright, frosty day. The dragoons cheered at every excuse. Afterwards we had the chance of a cheery lunch as a ration of wine was issued for the purpose. The beaches supplied oysters, the proviantamt provided wine, a bottle and a half of fizz for 3 warriors' throats. There was a certain satisfaction in it, for the 3 half bottles bore the inscription "Reserved for Great Britain," and were accordingly D of the very best. One had a special pleasure in drinking wine that the English had counted on, and that cost nothing into the bargain. But I noticed that no French vintner labels his bottles "Reserved for Germany." That would only apply to their inferior productions, for the best goes to England. 2. Dryweege, February 1st, 1915. If one really lives in the war, I mean, if one puts peace resolutely behind one gains a pleasant feeling of detachment from all that one has known. All that lies behind me can be seen at a glance, because of the war and the detached point of view that it gives, like a high mountain range full of ridges, abysses, slopes, deep valleys, and trackless masses of stone in the distance. All the details have suddenly taken their proper place as a part of my peace amongst this orderly assembly of masses and lines. But I would do the war an injustice were I always to look back to peace as a bad horse yearns for the stable. so that if I did not take you out of peace into the war with me, into the winds that blow there, into the code that it has set up, into the feelings that it dictates, I should feel that I had abandoned you in those high and far-off mountains, and as you are the only creature that I take with me into this strange land that is called war, I know that you must have a part in it. Perhaps you will think that I am consciously avoiding a difficulty uniting the war in front of us with the peace behind us. But I say that this is to live in two worlds. It is not honest. Gitz, February 7th, 1915. The reinforcement of the infantry has brought about a redistribution of units in the billeting area allotted to the division. So I find myself not far from the old cluster of farms in a larger village with a church, the inevitable convent, schools, etc. As there are a great many farms in the neighbourhood, I have to deal with many matters of civil administration which are most complicated and tiresome. Passes, requisitions, proclamations, for which I have taken over a small printing press street cleaning, burial of the dead, protection of the milch cows from the grasping and wasteful hands of the supply column people, police and guards, repairs to the church clock, closing hours of pubs, and many other oddments have to be attended to. February 14th, 1915. I read in the papers that the bread consumption of Greater Berlin is so regulated that each person will get £4 a week. This may be enough or it may not. The workingman's wife of the great city may dictate other laws. It will be seen that the masses are becoming unpleasantly aware of their participation in the destiny and the life of our people. This in a way which is not the way of our people, but the way of masses. No national unity, no courage, and no sacrifice can prevent this. If only it is true that this bread rationing will see us through till the next harvest. But what if the crops fail? The horses will not be able to pull their weight on short rations of oats, and there may not be enough of them anyhow. Will the farmer be able to carry out his usual work with oxen and a steam plough lent to him for the day? The landowners and their stewards spend enough time in the fields. February 17th, 1915. It may be that the positive achievement of the war is that it destroys many untruths. Retrogression cannot stand before it, retrogressive inadequacy least of all. This is comforting. One thinks, should all this trial and sacrifice, all this upheaval and change in one's inward consciousness, be borne in order that one may sink back afterwards into the same muddy water in which we once lived? I cannot believe it. Peace is surely a long way off still. It is true that we are waging war almost exclusively in the enemy's country, but it could go against us just as well in a foreign country as at home. If we could surround, defeat and disarm a French army, I should not care whether we did so at Verdun or at Frankfurt and Main. They say that they make war, but the war is leading them. It is like riding. If a man lets his horse carry him along the Kurfürstendamm, he says that he has ridden along the Kurfürstendamm. It seems that we have only one man who knows how to make war. I take it that he will comb through Russia, which may take longer than he thinks in view of the numbers of men and lice, and that he will then come over here and have the courage to bring this long front into movement. March 1st, 1915. The weather is bringing in March with a regular gust of folly. Real thunderstorms with thunder and lightning, during which the silly snow still flings itself in white clouds upon the earth. Wind, ice and thaw, dark yellow blankets of clouds and nonsensical snatches of sun, and always storms, storms, storms. We have just had 5 thunderstorms in 24 hours. This appears to be a custom of the country. We have a Dondersturm on top of the house, the reassuring local name for a lightning conductor. A wind umbrella would suit me better than the thunder umbrella, for the wind blows through these jerry-built erections like a tune on the bagpipes, and the cold hearths make a suitable accompaniment. They say that March is the wettest month here. How it can differ in that respect from the February we have just gone through is not clear to me. No swaddling clothes can be as wet as this country. No one can be very pleased with life, nor does the war help in any way. Newly arrived munitions are thundering and the trenches are lamenting. We are trying to take on the cultivation of the fields with our own men, for many of them in the fighting zone have no one to attend to them. We are improving communications somewhat and doing the pubs. A good turn by letting them sell German beer, which can be procured at great expense from Bruges, against our better judgment. This is all so insignificant and unsatisfactory. No one seems to be able to raise waiting to an art in which one may take pleasure. The troops are spending a lot of money on beer, cigars and brandy, instead of sending it home as they used to. The Corps field cashier told me that in the first few months, when the men could not spend any money, about 1.5 million marks were sent home every month from our Corps alone. Now only about half this sum is sent. I have my own ideas on the subject. 2. Gitz, March 15th, 1915. What a time we live in. Spring is coming, and one expects for oneself as well a share of resurrection the same as every year. But the expectation looks so different this time. The resurrection of nature, one's own pleasure in the growing light, in the warmer sun, in the disappearance of rain and fog, is strangely and cruelly changed into one idea. Now we can advance, soon. The masses that have lain in their armed winter sleep, as under an evil spell, will be set in motion. These milder winds, these piping thrushes, these breathing fields, excite the will to live, not for friendly deeds, but for a shock to measure the weight of new forces, to battle for life and death. In the springtime, love or strife seem to be equally fitted to make our pulses beat faster, and many an one looks at himself and wonders if it does not mean the same thing. We are entering this period with the knowledge that the end is yet far away. Many believe that the victor will be the one who can hold out the longest. Seeking to build in the spirit, I still hope that the war will be decided otherwise than by the effect of the power machine that can hold out longest and work most economically. Unfortunately, the weak ones who look back to their home and hearth, even more so to their chair and bed, their circle of friends in the pub, and their slippers, and are getting nervous through the lack of these things, is increasing. Then they make out that the war has made them nervous and go home. Everyone that goes into the war should have to burn his house behind him. Indeed, he should not have a house at all. In this respect, the mercenary, the professional soldier, have their advantages. It is a matter of course to them, and they are not thinking of getting home. I will cherish the day on which I shall see you again, but I don't feel I have any right to come home yet. I have the conscience of a submarine. Same place, same date. The colours of the landscape are very bright, but not sharp and definite. It is as if it had been drawn with a delicate silver pencil, or rubbed, very soft. The troops are providing horses for the cultivation of the field, as the peasantry have hardly any left. The ammunition columns are not only available for this duty, they even offer themselves for it, so that the horses which have little to do at the present time will not be getting entirely out of the habit of draft work. Same place, same date. Things are always happening that educate one for peace, so to speak. We are going in for cavalry training, but whoever knows what the real thing is like must have a horror of such exercises. When there are not bullets and rifles, there is always a false picture which the minds of men confuse with the real thing. But mankind is so unaccustomed to appreciate the gulf that lies between the real thing and the gesture, even the theatrical impression, that a Rittmeister of the divisional staff, otherwise a very fine and serious fellow, got off the following performance. In a field that had to be ploughed, the horses shied in a certain place every time we went over it. They dug and found a very lightly covered grave of 6 German soldiers, who had doubtless been left by quickly advancing troops who never found them afterwards. The corpses had to be reburied. As the poor fellows had not yet had any military honours, this officer, who had charge of reburial, wanted to fire a volley over the grave in their honour. What did he do? As it seemed too dangerous to him to fire rounds of ball, he tried to get blank cartridges, of which quantities have recently been issued for training behind the front. Luckily there was none in the neighbourhood, and the buried warriors were deprived of the honour of a theatrical salvo as a last greeting. March 19th, 1915. Things are standing as still as in a swamp. All the things that are supposed to count as movements, that are described and celebrated as such in the papers, are only bubbles. The effects of the submarines do not move England. The advance of Soissons is long since forgotten, and indeed trickles down to nothing. Everything stinks just like a swamp stinks. Joffre has not beaten our army, but paralyzed it like a frog. One can only hold out if one knows there is a plan that has sense and understanding. Instead of this, there is no plan at all, and we do not know how to make the next move. One sets up gigantic guns or such like monstrosities and gets enthusiastic over the caliber of their shells. One bombards Nieuport and Ypres with them, though everybody admits that it is no real use. March 24th, 1915. I am glad that BB has got his commission, and yet he must not only have conducted himself well and gallantly, of which there is no doubt, but his superiors must have pushed him as well. I was in the same position in having to recommend a Jew for a commission, and had my work cut out to push him through. But though I am fully convinced that the war entirely justifies the promotion of everyone who has distinguished himself brilliantly and has taken his part on these grounds, a number of incidents have shown that Jews are unsuitable as officers and for positions of command. Hence, it is hard to take the responsibility of making then officers on their own account. I wondered for a long time what exactly is the cause of it. It seems to me to be requiring of a being that has been bred for certain qualities through long generations of inbreeding, that he should suddenly show quality for which the system of breeding has not fitted him. There are other professions, too, that the Jew instinctively declines, that he cannot grasp hold of, and I am convinced that he has not the psychology of an officer. And my splendid K, who says as a Jew of the Jews I ought to know them, bears me out in this. Let us suppose for a moment that we had a mercenary army. Would the Jew choose a soldier's life for himself? If he feels that he is fit to be an officer, it is not because he is a born officer, but because he wants to prove that he can do it too. I should like to tell you here how I recommended a Jew for promotion to commission rank and what happened. At the beginning of the war, many officer aspirants were seconded from the cavalry as ADCs. This borrowing from cavalry formations took place in order that the infantry should not be weakened by detaching officers or those who might become officers. I, among others, was ordered to send an ADC to the staff of the general commanding one of our infantry brigades. I seconded a reserve Lance Sergeant Koch for the post. The general was pleased with his ADC. He was a well-educated, well-bred young man, looked all right, was a good horseman, and had his heart in the right place. The general was pleased to notice that his horses got on very well since K was appointed to his staff. The general himself was better looked after. He rode round the positions of his troops with K alone, as nobody could find his way on the map so well as his new ADC, and the general discovered many other virtues in him. Nor was I entirely without merit, for, as the general was not pleased with his horse, or the horse was not pleased with the general, one can never be sure. I enchanged J for a particularly reliable animal which was known as the Yellow Sofa, and which had up till then graced the ranks of my squadron. After riding him in a bit, as he said, the general was very pleased with the horse. Only a few weeks passed before the Lance Sergeant, who had shown up well in carrying out his orders, received the Iron Cross on the recommendation of the general. When the general thought the time was come, he wrote me a letter. He represented to me that one really could not allow such an excellent young man to run round any longer without the silver epaulets of an officer, that he had all the qualities one could require in an officer. I was to recommend the Lance Sergeant for a commission, as he intended to have him as his ADC on regular establishment. He would endorse my recommendation. As K belonged to my squadron, I had to make the recommendation to the Emperor myself. The general's endorsement might help it. I did as I was told. The very next day, a proposal for promotion to a commission on the unattached list, as this document has the honour to call itself, was placed in the hands of the general, as I, too, could take the responsibility for it. All the columns of the form were cleanly ruled and neatly filled in, as required by regulations for these documents. The general read over the details with pleasure. There stood his family and given names, the date of his birth, his profession. The general had not been wrong. The man had led an orderly life. But he suddenly froze. For there stood, just under the word religion, there could be no mistake about it, just under the word religion stood Hebrew. The general flew up in the air. Everything that was Prussian in him was horrified, everything that was Christian no less. And the general was very Prussian and very Christian. What was he to do? He rode at once to me. "Did you know that K is a Jew?" he asked. "Certainly I knew it," said I. "Then you cannot recommend him for a commission," said the general very convincingly. "I cannot find," said I, "that his beliefs in any way detract from his courage, his usefulness, his good behaviour, and all those good qualities that you, sir, have often told me that you discovered and prized in him." "Well, yes," said the general, "that is quite true. But you must admit that he has qualities. I mean Jewish qualities," I answered carefully. That at any rate the general had not yet noticed such qualities. For the rest I did not quite understand what qualities he meant. The general did not elaborate this theme. "Oh, well, it won't do," said he. "You must take back the recommendation." "But, sir," said I, "you asked for the proposal yourself. How could I take back a recommendation for a subordinate when I have made it according to my duty and my conscience?" The general went away, but he did not give up his idea. For a long time he did not forward the recommendation. He discussed the case every day. I could not be blind. The lance sergeant had Jewish qualities. They formed the chief part of his argument. So the matter dragged along for a week or two. One day the general was talking about it again. "You can say what you like to me," said he. "K has unbearable Jewish qualities. Only Jewish qualities, in fact." I thought to myself, this has gone far enough. "Yes, sir," said I, almost astonished. "As he is a Jew, why should he have other than Jewish qualities?" The general was taken aback. Something had happened to him that he could not fathom. I had suddenly let go of the rope on which he had been pulling. He felt that he had fallen down. He still had a vague feeling that everything was not quite as it should be, but he felt himself disarmed. "Do you really mean that?" said he. "Yes," said I. He rode back to his billet and wrote his forwarded and recommended under the recommendation of a Jew for promotion to commissioned rank. Gitz, March 28th, 1915. The door is always going. The most insignificant things come through and are doubly annoying because they make themselves felt in spite of the war. A subaltern from another unit wants to exchange a horse. He brings in a fine bay, whose coat is the only attractive thing about it. The sergeant major does not get on with the sergeant and grouses. The man in the kitchen asks how many eggs he is to cook for dinner. The sergeant major brings in a pack of orders in which there is no reference to us. The secretary of the village council asks whether 3 little pigs may be sold. Visit from an old woman who thinks that I will understand her if she shouts loud enough. I do not understand. 5 minutes later, another visit from the same woman. Visit from an NCO from the office with passes to sign. I wrote my name 53 times, as one doing lines at school. A subaltern has come here for a Sunday visit from a long way off and rides away again. Now it is night, and I can take up my pen with some confidence that I will not be interrupted. But I am too tired. I rode to divisional headquarters today in the face of an icy north wind, a vain effort to make myself useful, and I am feeling feverish. Yesterday the same useless stunt to army headquarters in Thielt. A horse that I have to ride in, apart from a tour of 43 kilometres for the G, is a machine that is getting tired and will fall to pieces if not held together. I would not mind getting tired for something sensible. Easter letter. West Flanders. I have not written to you for a long time, but I have thought of you all the more as a silent creditor. But when one owes letters, one suffers from them, so to speak, at the same time. It is indeed not so simple a matter to write from the war, really from the war. And what you read as field post letters in the papers usually have their origin in the lack of understanding that does not allow a man to get hold of the war, to breathe it in, although he is living in the midst of it. Certainly it is a strange element for everyone, but I probably find it even stranger and feel more like a fish out of water than many who write about it, because I try to understand it. The further I penetrate its true inwardness, the more I see the hopelessness of making it comprehensible for those who only understand life in the terms of peacetime and apply these same ideas to war in spite of themselves. They only think that they understand it, It is as if fishes living in the water could have a clear conception of what living in the air is like. When one is hauled out onto dry land and dies in the air, then he will know something about it. So it is with the war. Feeling deeply about it, one becomes less able to talk about it every day. Not because one understands it less each day, but because one grasps it better. But it is a silent teacher, and he who learns becomes silent too. The stagnation that this siege warfare has brought about gives a superficial observer the illusion of peace. One regulates intercourse with the local population as well as one can. One tries to arrange for the tillage of the land. One trains the men as well as possible in mud and filth. One visits the officers of neighbouring units. One spends hours in discussion. The war is ignored, for not everyone has the capacity or the habit to notice it in everything and everyone. Yet it is behind everything and everyone. That is the strange part of it. The starlings that winter hereabouts in hordes whistle like rifle bullets, and as the bullets cannot have learnt to whistle from the starlings, one may safely presume the opposite. And everything whistles its tune of the war. The houses, the fields, men, beasts, rivers, and even the sky. The very milk turns sour under the thunder of shell fire. You will think that I am romancing, but I am not. Only the others do not notice this. They do not listen to the starlings. They hardly look at the fields. Mankind has not changed. Since yesterday, and the milk has got sour through standing, what exactly do they experience of the war? They know that the dugouts in the line are comfortably fitted up, that they have brought up a mirror and a clock, that they have barbed wire in front of them, that the gunners hide their shells carefully, that troops are flung in here and there, that the field post functions, that there are brave men who have been rewarded with the Iron Cross. Then again, they notice effects. They see the wounded, hear of the dead, hear of towns that have been taken, of positions lost or won. But that is not the melody of war. It is as if one were to describe and understand the being and the melody of the wind by saying that it chases dead leaves, that the weathercock creaks, and that the washing on the line dries. All that is not its melody, as the fitting out of a trench, the Iron Cross, and even the dead are only infinitesimal outward and recognizable signs of an unknown and hidden majesty, be it sublime or cruel. Perhaps some poet has already seen this majesty unveiled, heard this melody, which may be nothing but a bellow, so that it can be reproduced. As for myself, the sounds increase, but the melody and rhythm remain obscure. And if I could summon all the poets of past times to sing the war, they might all remain silent, unless one should answer who has been through hell. So you may appreciate how hard it is to write about the war. Its being is veiled, and where the greatness is recognizable, human speech has no expression to cope with it. What can you make of it when I tell you that I live in a house with no architectural style, windows that do not shut properly, and high rooms, that I have a bed, that 2 little old women wait on me and do my cooking, and that I curse the eternal rain that the sky of Flanders pours down upon us? All this seems to me so immeasurably dull compared with the war, just as one can only bear the insignificant things of life by not talking about them. I use the same soap as in peacetime. I have time to brush my teeth in the morning. I have a brown coffee pot and a stove that does not heat well. Why should I tell you about them? The piping of the starlings, the aspect of the sickly fields, the thunderous air and the sour milk will tell you much more. But in the midst of the monstrous event stands man, the thousands and the hundreds of thousands, the combatants and the non-combatants, who all have one wish and one goal, to cast aside the war, to render its effect invisible so far as they can be understood, to let a well-earned peace grow its grass over the victims, and to carry on as before, broadly speaking. The times may be as big as they will. Man remains small. Transformation and cleansing have nothing to do with him. They say they know that we will win. What a wonderful thing it is to know this and to say it. But we shall not conquer ourselves. We will carry on as before and think what wonderful new things we have set up in place of the old. For many things that are ought to be scrapped, and many that are as yet undiscovered are worth bringing to life. That sounds very hard, doesn't it? But it should at least be allowed to him who feels the hardness of the times to speak out his hard words. You will ask what I would put in the place of that which is past, or what new things there are to be discovered. I believe that it could be expressed thus: a religion of defensive power for all peoples. There should be a belief in the right to be in a state of defense, to defend oneself, this and nothing more. This would give to us and to the world, which would adopt our religion, such immense strength, for religions outlast history, peoples and empires, civilization and philosophy, discoveries and the progress of man, so that no nation or concourse of nations would stand up to us. Defensive power would stand sanctified, with the weapons of defense in her hand, as with the products of toil in her arms, unattackable, uniting through the strength of the idea, resting on a joyous security of belief, inspiring piety because of man's belief in her. I would not challenge this time to bring forth a religion did I not know how great it is. It bears the child. We are but clumsy helpers in her heavy hour. And who shall deny either the immensity of the event or the helplessness of mankind, even for our people alone to turn it into good? An enormous longing arises in the world, not longing for strange countries, not for seas, fortresses, riches and power, but for a gift of grace from these times that are worthy alike of themselves and of us. March 30th, 1915. We have been doing a reconnaissance exercise behind the lines, just like peacetime. Same old trotting without sense or rhythm. I had a real chateau for my night quarters furnished, but half emptied. It belonged to the Duc de Beaufort. The owners are not there. Have they flown? Are they in Brussels? I slept in the Duchess's magnificent carved four-poster. A little virgin in a pretty baroque shrine looked down upon me graciously from the wall. Marvellous birds went to and fro on the arabesques of the wallpaper. Ancient yew trees, tattered by the wind and the years, rustled in front of the high windows. A little slate hung on one of the bedposts, and there were still shopping and errand notes on it, in the handwriting of the Duchess. How long has it been hanging there? Everything in the room was pleasant, really charming, kindly, and human. When I awoke in the morning, I wrote a little declaration on the slate, as there was still room for it. Madame, j'ai dormi dans votre lit seul sans vous. C'était un peu fou. Quand même je vous aimais. Perhaps she is an old lady, but I felt that she was worthy of this declaration. By the way, this chateau was the only one with a real style that I have found in this country yet. Gits, April 4th, 1915. We have had a series of enchanting early spring days. The landscape is marvellously full of a soft brightness. The fields are aflame. Lights like a Van Gogh sketch gleam in the damp, greasy furrows. There is much lilac and silver in everything. The face of the country is happier than that of any other plain, and that I know. There is not a dead stretch of sand, not a neglected corner. Everything is well cultivated. One notices for the first time how narrow is the actual zone of battle and destruction. The peasants' pleasure in their work has returned with the necessity of tilling the fields. They are gaining confidence that it will not be in vain, and that they will not again be exposed to devastation. April 18th, 1915. The German flying service leaves much to be desired. They are stout fellows, but what is the use of that? We have mostly unarmed planes. The few armed ones are slower than the French and cannot come out in squadron formation, as there are too few of them. Why? As if they could not be built. We learnt their use as a weapon from the enemy first of all, but people make a fuss as if we had invented something wonderful. We have no imagination. Vichfueger, April 24th, 1915. The effects of the successful gas attack were horrible. I am not pleased with the idea of poisoning men. Of course, the entire world will rage about it first and then imitate us. All the dead lie on their backs with clenched fists. The whole field is yellow. They say that Ypres must fall now. One can see it burning, not without a pang for the beautiful city. Langemarck is a heap of rubbish, and all rubbish heaps look alike. There is no sense in describing one. All that remains of the church is the doorway with the date 1620.